As I think about Dr. King and I think about his desire for justice, I'm brought to think that his dream was really not just for people of color, it was for all the oppressed, all those who lived in poverty, all those who didn't have the same opportunities. And he was gifted at being able to speak to people millions at a time and yet have you feel like he was speaking just to you. Part of that was his ability as a preacher, I think. It certainly helped. But the thing about Dr. King was that his vision and his beliefs transcended religion. They transcended definition. They were really about how it is that we think about our central humanity and our adherence to the core principles of justice for everybody that moved people to act in all walks of life. I am very proud to represent the 37th Legislative District in the state. The 37th Legislative District has the most people of color in the state. It's one of, I think Senator Hasegawa and I might disagree, but I think it has some of the most, one of the most racially and economically diverse districts in the state, and it is in the heart of Martin Luther King Jr. County. And so for me, Dr. King's example is a central inspiration for me in my journey as an immigrant coming from India at the age of 16 all the way to my position here. But Dr. King's work was not limited just to places where we have people of color or anything like that. In all 49 districts across the state, we have people in great need, people who are oppressed, people who are facing tremendous strife and conflict and aren't able to make ends meet. And the truth is that in our country today, the richest country in the world, the United States of America, we have 47 million people who live in poverty, under the poverty line. And 21% of all of our children under the age of 18 live in poverty. Those numbers mirror the numbers here in Washington state. And in Washington, we know we have a crisis in mental health care. We know we have a crisis in education. We know we have a crisis in homelessness that we are trying to address, and we must address in this body. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to give a sermon, to preach at the pulpit at a church in Edmonds on honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Day. And in doing that, I had time to think about Dr. King's message and what he was trying to say to all of us and what we can lift up. And this is one of the things that I think Senator Dammeier was talking about to some degree, which is that Dr. King's vision held the undeniable truth that all men, all people are created equally. But it also recognized the undeniable reality that all people are not treated equally. And that in order for us to deal with this situation, we have to recognize that we simply can't wipe the slate clean of the fact that we have had slavery in this country. We have had the oppression of voting rights. We have had the ownership of men and women by others. And so when we think about equality, we have to also think about equity. We have to think about how we get everybody to the starting line, the same starting line, before we start to talk about equality. Dr. King lived in a time of conflict, and so do we. And right here in this body, I think there's probably just about every ideology represented. And we know that that is how democracy is supposed to work, but it's also sometimes what makes it important or what brings forward divisions among us. But they can also bring out the best in us. And today, I introduced a bipartisan bill along with the Secretary of State for automatic voter registration. And some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have signed on to this. This is about expanding democracy, about making sure that we give people the right to vote and to choose who they want to vote for, who they want to represent them. And if we can do that with majority support of this body as we move through this, along with other bills that I think are more controversial around the Voting Rights Act, things like that, we will show people that our divisions actually make us better, that we can come together and stop playing partisan politics all the time, even when we get closer and closer to the end of session. I'm hoping that we can focus on the concept of satyagraha, which I think I spoke about last year on the floor, which is Gandhi's insistence on truth. Satyagraha means insistence on truth. And it was a principle that Dr. King held up in his life. I'm hoping that we can remind ourselves, as Dr. King said, that we must focus on courage instead of caution. And I'm hoping that as we do that, we can think about the fact that we have made huge strides forward on so many things, but the civil rights movement is not over. It was not over when we desegregated our schools. It was not over when we allowed blacks a partial right to vote. It was not over when we abolished Jim Crow. It was not over when we stopped hosing people in the streets. It was not over when we stopped allowing people to not sit at the same lunch counters. The reality, Mr. President, is that there is a sincere hope today coming from me, from many here in this chamber on both sides of the aisle, that we can work together to honor Dr. King's life and his work and his legacy, not just today, on the one day that we call the remembrance of Dr. Martin Luther King, but all the way through this hopefully short session that we're going through, so that as we get further and further away from this date, we remember that it is our responsibility to leave a country for our children and for our communities that reflects the work, the life, and the legacy of Dr. King. Thank you, Mr. President.